This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening. Welcome to the Infrastructure Oversight Board meeting for the City of Burbank, June 24th, 2021. Let's all rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to roll call.
Armin Avazian.
Present.
Walter Brennan Jr.
Present.
Maria Coronado.
Present.
Greg Jackson.
Present.
Vanessa Rochelle. Present.
Yes, present.
Tamala Takahashi.
Happy to be here.
And Jeff Vanderbort.
Me too.
Thank you.
Great. All present and for. Do we have any announcements? Are there any announcements for us?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Bergman.
Hello, Madam Chair, board members, just a couple of things quickly. I mentioned last month that we were looking into when we could start in-person meetings, and we will be able to do that in August, so we can kind of flesh out some details and let you know at our meeting in July. And just wanted to bring your attention to something that Mr. Hahn will talk about later. You'll notice in the pending agenda items, we added a monthly proposed schedule, so that should help us understand where we're going in the future. And those are my two items. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. It's great to see that. A lot more information there. Jackie, do we have anyone waiting for public comment?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar and the approval of the minutes. I'll take a motion in a second, unless we have some comment.
Okay.
Or yes.
Madam Chair, I move for approval of the minutes as submitted.
Thank you. Do we have a second or any question?
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Brennan, thank you. All right, with no further question, we'll take a vote. I was going to say all in favor say aye, but please go ahead.
Armin Avazian.
Yes.
Walter Brennan Jr.
Yes.
Maria Coronado.
Yes.
Greg Jackson.
Yes.
Vanessa Rochelle.
Yes.
Tamala Takahashi.
I'll abstain as I wasn't here last month.
Thank you. And Jeff Vanderbort.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that. Moving on to reports to the board.
Through the chair, is Hoon Han here? I don't see him on the screen.
Yes, I'm here, Ken.
Hey, there you are. Thank you very much. I was looking around. So this item, this continuation of the unfunded project list is something we took on last month and appreciated the board's input. And to be brief, similar, as I said, to the board last month, the introduction is we had a great achievement that we accomplished this past year in creating the capital project methodology for prioritization. We created the first ever capital improvement program that had prioritized projects in it for the coming fiscal year, which will start next week. And the iceberg, as I like to call it when we first started, is this unfunded project list. And there's plenty to it. And we will be working on it in the coming months and coming years with you and the departments to essentially bring them into possibly an active status and prioritize them as part of the entire annual budget process with you. So with that, Mr. Hahn, thank you for starting us.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Chair Coronado. So tonight, and the members of the board, as far as I don't have a presentation, I was just going to go kind of leave it open-ended. Like Mr. Bergman said, one of the takeaway is to include the unfunded project list in our annual project budget process. And based on your input last month, I think one of the idea was to at least categorize the list, category 1, 2, and 3. So that's something we would bring back, and we have to kind of go through the process of going through that. So that will be folded into our budget process. So I'm just going to make, we have several staff members available to answer any questions, additional questions that you might have. So I'm just going to leave it open for the boards to really comment on.
Mr. Vanderbort, you have a question?
Madam Chair, yes. Mr. Hahn, can you just expand a little bit as to what you mean by being part of the budget process? And the reason I ask that is up to now, and this goes into our third year of budget process for the board coming up ahead, it has been a very short process of real opportunity for much discussion. How do we make sure that when you say it's part of the budget process that we're not up against a deadline that will make it impossible really for us to perhaps chew on some of these issues and digest them like we are now? In other words, we had the review last time. This gives us a second bite of the apple. Ms. Takahashi, who wasn't here, will have an opportunity to participate as well. But how do you see it being part of the budget process, this list of unfunded wish list?
Sure. The budget process definitely, I mean, we're always against a timeline because of the schedule of the budget process. The goal for us is to bring the items to the board and be transparent as we go through the process. So last year's process, actually, we were very transparent. The projects that were being proposed, you actually were able to see how the projects were evaluated, and we didn't leave any projects that the departments actually wanted to move forward and request funding for. We did not take it off any list. So it was actually very transparent in the process. So the goal for the unfunded project list is now we want to fold that in the early on before the departments actually select the projects and move forward with it. We want to give the board the opportunity to review it and have inputs and see which projects that you thought that should move forward. But ultimately, it would be the decision of the departments to decide which projects they would actually can move forward based on the budget and also the staff availability.
Thank you. So we will have an opportunity to look at this before the actual budget, sort of hurry up and review it and approve it because it's coming up in council next in 3 weeks kind of thing.
Yes, and that's the part where we would bring it back so that the board has an opportunity to put a numbers, a category 1, 2, or 3. And then so that at least we're not going to rank the unfunded project list. I think that would be extremely difficult, but just to have it, categorized and the board may request for the departments to look at specific projects, but there's no guarantee that the department may move forward with it. And we will have justification, bring back why it's not a right time and the right project for the department to move forward with.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else have questions? Ms. Takahashi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hahn, for providing the list in the packet. I watched the meeting from last month, and I appreciate the many questions that the board asked, and several of the responses were very illuminating. So thank you. And I agree with Mr. Berkman that the CIP prioritization process that we came up with, and that actually you guys came up with, and we wholeheartedly supported, is a great first step, and I'm so excited to have seen that. And I'm really glad to hear from last meeting that there's a plan to have project management meetings with the different departments and to move forward with that. I think that's a great idea. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this whole process of bringing unfunded items to the funding list will work together with the board and the departments and your office and everybody involved. Just a couple general questions I had, and then I have a few questions about specific projects that are on the list that I did send an email to you about them, but I would like to ask them in the group as well so that the group can hear your answers and the public as well. So a general question I have is kind of where does this list live? Who kind of has ownership of it? And then when something does move off the list, because there are some items I'll be asking you about that have moved off the list since the last time we saw it. When an item does move off the list, who moves it off the list? And then where does that update go once it's been removed?
So the list itself, actually, what we do in Public Works, we actually circulate the list to all the departments. And they're the ones who actually make the determination which projects falls off the list and which projects actually are added. So it's not something that we control. If Parks has a certain projects that they want to add on, then it's up to them. And then CDD, if they wanted to actually add something, and if Public Works has projects that they wanted to add, then they would add those projects.
And then where does the list live when it's not being edited?
The list is updated during the budget process, and my understanding is that the list is actually shared as part of the budget presentation. I'm not sure how it was used this year, but previous years, my understanding is that it's actually it's just kind of more of a information to the council that this is kind of the unfunded project list, and this is something that's there.
Yeah, Madam Chair, through the chair, Member Takahashi, the answer to your question is, I believe the list lives in the Finance Department, and the Finance Department and the Public Works Department jointly manage it.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I did a comparison between the list that we received early on when we first formed the IOB. I think it might have been the 4th or 5th meeting, Mr. Vanderboord, if you remember, when we got that unfunded list. I compared that list to this updated one. I was curious to see which projects weren't on there and had, for whatever reason, been removed. And so I would like to talk about them partly because of my curiosity and partly because I think there's some projects on the list that would be interesting to hear whether they were completed and how they were completed and how they were funded. So one of the projects on the list is the Chandler Bikeway Access. That was on our first unfunded list, but it's not on this one updated. And that's including 27 curb ramps and high visibility crosswalks. So were those put in and completed? And is that why it was moved from the list? And if so, how was that one funded? If you know.
I don't have the details if that's actually have been completed, but as far as the ramps, as part of the overlay program and also the sidewalk program, I know that we do upgrade and have installed new ramps as needed. And I think Mr. Kriski is available to address it in more detail as far as the project.
Great.
Yes. Good evening, or good evening, good afternoon, members of the board. David Kriski with Community Development. There is a project called Chandler Bikeway Access that does talk about upgrading several locations. And it sounds like there was an earlier version that was slightly different description, but the overall purpose of that project was not to necessarily restore or rehabilitate existing curb ramps, but to actually create new crossings at Chandler. So if you look on page 1 of 3 of the unmet needs list, you'll see locations along Chandler that don't have access to the bikeway right now. So the purpose was to add
Okay.
like mid access points. And so those have not been funded. They are unfunded. And I will also say that this got sort of migrated into a broader project with the Complete Streets Plan for a more holistic reconfiguration of Chandler that would make those crossings, but would also reconfigure the street into a traditional kind of one-way couplet on each side to improve safety and add additional bike access. And that's now in our Complete Streets Plan as a potential future project. And I know Board Member Vandervoort, this is something that's near and dear to his heart. I believe he tried to do this about 12 years ago and failed, didn't have support at the time. We actually, as part of our Complete Street outreach, did get comments about looking at that again. It was still somewhat divisive, but there was enough interest in migrating that to a project that it made the Complete Streets Plan. It is a plan for future, or a project for future consideration.
Great, thank you. And I realize now, I think it is the same thing from before, but it has been reworded. So I apologize for not recognizing it was the same, basically the similar project, or at least wrapped up. And then speaking of that same project, and that the fact that it's in the Complete Streets Plan, there's a couple other projects on the unfunded list that are related to things that would be in the Complete Streets Plan. Do those projects that are in that plan, are they intended to try to use that plan to get grant funding in order, or outside funding in order to fund those projects? Or are you looking potentially to use city funding or general fund, or maybe a mix of the two, to get those particular complete street related plans accomplished?
I think the Complete Streets Plan is something that we definitely use to try and find outside funding. It's also more of a kind of a roadmap of these are the priorities that the plan identifies as something we should look towards. Some of them are in construction and are funded. So when the council adopted the plan, they also directed us to begin implementation with Public Works on 3 kind of early action projects, mainly in downtown. Those are underway now. And then the rest, yes, we would look for outside funding. We would look for opportunities to, integrate it with other efforts that are happening. For instance, there's discussion of the BRT project right now going through Burbank, the North Hollywood to Pasadena BRT, which would impact Olive Avenue Bridge. And Complete Streets talked about what we could do to Olive and Magnolia Bridges to improve those. And so, we use Complete Streets as justification to potentially, add or insert our needs into other regional projects. So, or like you said, we would potentially pursue outside grant funding for some of them, and keep that Complete Streets Plan kind of ongoing. Quite frankly, some of those Complete Streets projects probably should migrate to the unfunded needs list because many of them are unfunded at this point. And so the board and the council could start to use the unfunded needs list to migrate projects off of there into, more further focus.
Yeah, I think I would like that. I don't, maybe not my fellow board members would like to have that too. And I also, in this discussion, it is interesting because I think part of the discussion the board might have about the unfunded list is to recognize that sometimes these projects may not be pulling from the general fund. And so when we prioritize them, or we ask that they're prioritized, we're not asking necessarily to say, let's use public or our city money for it, that we're asking to maybe pursue more grant money or to put some more effort into trying to find a way to make it work with outside funding. So I think that's important to have in the discussion. And we're glad that you brought that up. Since I have you, Mr. Kriske, I have a couple other related to your department. One of the other ones that was on the unfunded list before that's not now is LED safety lights at traffic stops, enhanced safety lighting at 7 traffic signals. Did that get done and completed? Or is that been put into another project? Or
that actually, I'm not sure. That may be a Public Works traffic project. And I don't know the status of LED upgrades. I know it is something that does get added over time, but I'm not certain of the status of that and how much of that is still unfunded.
Okay. And the next one, I'm not sure if this is in your scope of responsibility or not, but one of the items on the unfunded list previously was downtown smart parking signs, update software and server, repair vehicle detection, et cetera, et cetera. What was that one? Or?
This is a kind of joint Public Works and CDD, and also a little bit confusing because there's been a transition of parking responsibilities from CDD or from Public Works into CDD. So with the council's desire to improve and implement more comprehensive parking management throughout the city, we made the switch to put the policy part of parking over in CDD, while Public Works still is our implementer and helps us manage our facilities and input and constructs items. We have some smart parking signs that were installed many years ago for certain garages to give real-time parking information. They, for a variety of reasons, aren't working anymore. And this project, which is not funded, would implement and restore that smart parking infrastructure that was put in by Public Works. Again, it was probably over 10 years ago. Quite frankly, we might want to be on pause with that or just leave it on the unfunded list, because we want to look at parking management. At least the council has asked us to look at parking management starting in our Metrolink stations, but then moving to downtown Burbank. And I feel like the technology has migrated quite a bit since when those were put in, that we may be going in a different direction. If the council asks us to do parking management in downtown Burbank, we may, quite frankly, rely on the fact that parking information comes to your smartphone and comes to your vehicle more than it does just on a sign. So, that's kind of also in a holding pattern while we work with you and with the council on overall parking management, I think.
Okay, because it looks to me, unless I missed something, that it was actually removed from the unfunded list. So okay. I'm thinking it sounds like
if it is, it's because I think we may want to take a step back with parking management in a bigger way.
Okay. That's great to hear, and I thank you for walking me through that process, that thought process. The next one, I'm not sure who is responsible for this one. The citywide stormwater quality compliance, ensuring state stormwater quality compliance. That was on the original list, but it's not on the new one. And that one I would think would be an ongoing thing, or I'm not sure. Mr. Berkman, do you have some? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The stormwater compliance and any stormwater quality program is not a project. It's part of our annual budget within Public Works and within our wastewater division. And our assistant director, Steve Walker, and his team take care of that with consultants. So that's probably why that is not there anymore. It's not a project, it's a program, really.
Okay, so that's another consideration too, is like whether something lives on the unfunded list as a project and whether it's a program, and making sure they're in the right place. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then the ones I have left are about parks. So, and I really appreciate Ms. Garcia sending the email with the answers to all of them. But the answers I found to be so interesting and exciting that I would love to hear you give us some updates on these projects, because I think the community would like to hear about them. So could you tell us a little bit about these items that are no longer on the unfunded list, happily, and why they are? So one is the picnic facility enhancement, and the other is the new dog park.
Yes, good evening, board members. I'm Marissa Garcia, Parks and Recreation. So yes, so the picnic facility enhancements, that item, so we completed the park shade structures at Johnny Carson Park. And what we have done is similar to some other annual projects. Our intent is to ask for funding on an annual basis, on an ongoing basis, to improve our picnic facilities throughout all of our park system in the city, doing 1 or 2 parks annually. So this current fiscal year, we completed the shade structures at Johnny Carson Park. The board may recall, we did request funding for shade structures at Verdugo Park. So that is our plan to tackle that park next. Next fiscal year, we'll evaluate all of our different parks. And our evaluation is, we use different criteria. Primarily is, how heavily used our parks are. So we'll tackle those first. But also look at, there are some parks that have really incredible shade canopy, right? Through natural with our trees. So we want to really look at some parks where, there aren't a lot of trees to provide that natural shade. So we might, for example, McCambridge, right? So there are some areas at McCambridge Park, the picnic areas closest to the playground have incredible shade because we have really a lot of trees in that area. But then when you go closer to the War Memorial, there are some picnic areas that are really in the middle of open space. And so that would be a park that's also heavily used. So we would be looking at that being probably higher on the priority than perhaps Brace. Brace is a heavily used park. So we know that that's important to the community. And so we want to enhance that as best we can. But we know that most of those picnic areas are currently being provided shade through our trees. So that's one. The other project that's not on the list that was board member Takahashi asked was our Walk of Fame. Our Walk of Fame, that project was to expand the footprint of our Walk of Fame at Isay Park, as well as install a new sign. That project was completed in 1920. It was done just in time for our Walk of Fame installation of our new inductees. That was done in the fall of 2019. And then the third project is the dog park. So the dog park was removed from the unfunded needs list because it has been funded through various funding sources that will not impact the general fund. So that project, we did receive a $150,000 sponsorship donation from the Dick Clark Foundation. And as part of that arrangement, the park will be named after Mr. Dick Clark, who had a business here in Burbank for many, many years, was an avid animal, particularly dog, a lover, adopted most of his dogs. So that was part of that arrangement. The additional funding to complete that project will come from LADWP. So that park, the dog park, will be built at Johnny Carson Park South, the southern part of Johnny Carson Park by Riverside Drive. So between the 134 freeway and Riverside Drive, which is where LADWP currently has a active project. So as part of that agreement and that arrangement with LADWP, they were required to restore the park back to its original state, which would mean irrigation, turf, trees. And so what we have, redoing the sidewalk. So they had to put some like driveways to access, to bring trucks on and off the site. So what we have renegotiated with them is for them, once they complete the project, they're going to grade the site. And we've determined the value of the work to bring the park back to its original state. And instead of them doing that work, they're just going to give us the money. We have billed them for a portion of that already. And so those funds, along with the $150,000 donation, we believe will be enough to complete the dog park. And so that project will not begin until that LADWP project is completed, which will be in the spring of 2022, so next year. And therefore we anticipate construction beginning in fiscal year 22-23. I believe I covered all of those. If I missed a project, please let me know.
That was it. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. So my last one on the unfunded list that got removed, it's a big one. And I don't know if we can talk about it much detail tonight, but I did notice that on the unfunded list from before, in the previous one, it included funding additional subsidized housing. And that is not on the list anymore. And so I'm wondering if anyone knows, because I know that that's still something the city wants to do, because I've heard the city council talk about it. So I'm just wondering if it's been moved to a different place, or if it's not under it's been considered to be not under our jurisdiction anymore, or do you have any information on that one, Mr. Berkman?
Yeah, thank you. I did not get the chance to chat with the CDD assistant directors. I know Mr. Krisky is here, but I think that's not in your purview. But this is obviously part of state law and compliance. I know community development is working to ensure that all the housing units that we have to build are being built. I believe, I know I just saw an email today, our housing element is being updated as part of the general plan. So that's all part of the process within community development's work plan itself. So that's probably why it was removed as a project, because similarly, it's a program now. It's a mandated program.
Got it. Okay.
And if I may, I know looking at the list, you also had debris base and permit mitigation.
Yeah.
That's part of a public works annual program that we do. So that was removed, similar to the stormwater quality compliance. And I believe you were probably going to ask about the seismic retrofit program too.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Hahn, I don't know if you had details on that, but I know that is an ongoing annual program that we do certain buildings. And I believe you're actually working on that.
Yes, so it's actually a funded project. That's why it's off the unfunded list. I'm actually currently working on upgrading 3 of the city's facilities. And so it's an ongoing project and a program.
Okay, so in summary, it sounds like there's 4 main reasons why things get moved from the off the unfunded list. One is it gets funded. That's the obvious one. Secondly, it's a project that's no longer needed. That's another possibility. It's either no longer needed or we've decided as a city or there's some reason why it's not being pursued anymore. Third is that it potentially has been merged with another project in a different way, but it still exists. It just exists underneath a different project group. Or fourth, it becomes programmatic. So those seems like the 4 kind of main reasons why they get moved. And so as we're talking about it, I'm wondering, I think maybe my fellow board members feel differently, but I think it would be nice to know this as things move forward, maybe during the quarterly updates, to see the unfunded list and then to see what's been moved off of it for whatever the reason is. If it hasn't been funded, or if it's been grouped into some other way or whatever, I think that's good to keep kind of track of the status of the different projects, especially as we move forward with prioritization, because if something gets moved off the list, that might change maybe the kind of landscape of how we as a group want to prioritize or put emphasis on certain projects. So yes.
Yes, through the chair, board member Takahashi, that's exactly the plan. I appreciate you bringing it up. As we move forward, we can let the board know in real time if things change off of the unfunded or onto the unfunded list. And it's certainly going to be part of the annual budget process. And to Mr. Vanderbort's question, when we say the annual budget process, this board and our process for developing the capital improvement program is in that process. So that's when we will do this, and we hear you loud and clear. If there are changes to it, we can definitely bring it up at our quarterly update.
And I promise this is my last comment and question. So I believe it was mentioned earlier today that the intention is to add a 1, 2, or 3. And I thought that was something that was in the original unfunded needs list that we received, had a high, medium, and low, priority. But one other thing it had on here was potential for outside funding. And I think it was interesting to know that too, as we were talking about earlier, that some of the projects on this list might be very good candidates for outside funding, like the ones that are under the Complete Streets Plan. So I don't know, that may be quite a bit of work, but I think having a column where we can at least note the projects that potentially could have either some outside funding, or we could pair up with other things like the BRT and pair them up and potentially put them in with other projects to avoid having to use general funds. I don't know, just have a place where we can make that note would be nice to have. So I don't know how that might be on there, but might be useful. And that's my last comment, I promise, Madam Chair.
And if I may, that actually is in part of the prioritization methodology. The score is increased if we have outside sources of funding or some sort of joint opportunity, which is kind of a funding opportunity too. The thing I would like to point out is staff is always looking for grant opportunities, and they come to us as well. The caution that we have is making sure we don't just get grant money and do a project just because we have the money, because we do have finite resources. And the prioritization is so critically important to use those resources for the best bang for the buck, and outside money to hit the prioritized projects is the best use and most efficient way to deliver our projects to the constituents. So absolutely, we'll always be looking for grant money. You, the board, will see that within the scoring, but this unfunded list is whittled down really by the department's initiative of saying, this is a high priority for us. Let's bring these forward, and we will prioritize the kind of ABC or 1, 2, 3 with you. And in forecasting ahead, the A's of the board will be considered as we go. To remind everybody, we go back and forth twice from the Development Oversight Committee internally and the Infrastructure Oversight Board. And we look at our priorities for 2 months, 2 bites at the apple, maybe 3. We've forecasted going into April now with the board if needed. And it'll be a good problem to have and look at and prioritize too many projects. And I think we will be there this coming year. But thanks for bringing that up.
Chair Coronado, somebody has a question and answer. I think Mr. Michael Ellman. Yep. I noticed that just for your reference.
Okay, so who has a question? I see Mr. Vanderborn has his hand out.
No, I think the public, somebody from the public had a question. If you click the Q&A, I noticed that there was somebody.
Oh, and the section, I'm sorry, Mr. Hahn, on section D, public comment. Jackie, I think somebody was looking to ask a question, Mr. Ellman. I don't know if we can go back.
I think, yeah, he said he was on hold before 6 o'clock, so it looks like he was there.
Okay.
The
Not sure how to answer.
IT technician said he can reopen the line.
Okay.
Yeah, the city's been having some technical difficulty with their phones. I had the same thing happen to me when I tried to call into another commission last week. So,
Okay,
Okay.
it looks like he's dialing in right now.
okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I see he commented that he is on hold, so if we can,
Okay.
let him in.
Maybe we hear Mr. Vanderborn really fast before we get to the next comment.
I was just going to say if, Jackie, I don't know if Mr. Ellman is still on the line.
Yes,
He said he
he's
wasn't
actually
in.
going to be transferred right now to be live with the board.
Okay, because normally I would have said, let's finish this item and then we can reopen public comment. But since he's on the line and he's been waiting, why don't we go ahead and put a pin in this item? We will come back to it and temporarily move back to public comment.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members. Madam Chair, you can let him know, I believe that we can take his call, Mr. Ellman.
Okay. We're ready to take your call, Mr. Ellman.
Sorry to disrupt your meeting. I'm calling concerning the placement of 5G transmitters in the city, which I know is not your thing and you can't stop them anyway. But I was talking to a gentleman who was surveying for one of the telecommunications company, and these sites have to have city power, and that involves infrastructure changes for pull boxes and for the boxes to energize these towers. My issue is this. Here in my area, we were lucky enough to have our streets paved a year ago. And now I'm wondering if those streets are now going to be cut up to put in these 5G towers. We've only had the benefit of new pavement, and it's wonderful that the city did it, but to go back to patches, and that seems to make no sense. My idea is, I know the city grades the condition of all streets in the city. Could it be done that the telecommunications permits be granted on streets which are in the worst condition, rather than tearing up brand new pavement to put in these boxes that are required to energize these 5G sites? Again, sorry to disrupt your meeting, but it seems like we've only had the benefits of brand new pavement for a very short time, and to see it getting cut up and destroyed and patched, it's not that efficient. Thank you for taking my call. Sorry to disrupt you guys. Good night.
No disruption at all. Thank you for your question. I would refer to staff. Staff has an answer, or if someone would like to comment.
Ms. Kurohara, I can briefly answer that, correct?
Yes, brief responses to public comment are fine.
Okay, so for the board, wireless telecommunication facilities and all utilities are coordinated with for our pavement management program at all times. So it's our absolute goal to make sure our streets are paved and they're not cut up by any utility, wireless or otherwise. And we are increasing those efforts. You'll notice one of the things that we talked about last time is our pavement management program, which we will have an update, and we will bring that report back to the board in future months, and that will be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we put a pin in a subject. I'm moving the pin right now and moving to Mr. Vanderboord, who had a question or comment to the last discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually wanted to comment on the three items that surround the Chandler bike path. I appreciate Mr. Kriski's update, and in an effort to lobby my fellow oversight board members, I wanted to make sure that we try to encourage Mr. Kriski to move the Chandler bike path improvements to the priority A or 1, if it isn't already there in your abilities to do so. But I wanted to make a couple of quick comments. One of them has to do with these mid-thoroughfare access points like Parrish, for example. I use the Chandler bike path probably once a week and walk it all the way from North Hollywood to Victory regularly. And we often use Parrish or any other street because I live on Parrish to access it. And as a pedestrian, it's very easy to access it without any ramps or any other additional improvements. So just wanted to give you a very slight comment that I don't see the need to do too much. At the end of the day, you know, if you're able to walk or push a bike, you can certainly get onto the bike path fairly easily. The biggest concern that I have is, you know, for most of you who have been in the city for a long time, you know, it's been over 20 years since the bike path got built, and it has been wildly successful. And yet we continue to, you know, I continue to walk on the dirt on top of the existing tracks that remain to get to Victory. I go to Lancers, by the way. That's where I go for a pit stop to get a cup of coffee. And it's a shame for all of us that we haven't been able to accomplish this. It's literally 20 years, I think. I forget what year the Chandler bike path was dedicated, but I suspect it was the 2002, 3, something like that. In any case, that to me, I hope that the board members find it within its wisdom to encourage staff to use some of the Measure P funds to help accomplish this project, if indeed those funds are needed. And then lastly, I I almost fell off my chair when Mr. Kriski said that there's a possibility of turning Chandler into a normal street. And I use the word normal, meaning traffic moving in one direction on either side, just as it does to so much of our entire area. And it is so in many other similar type of streets in Culver City and so many other parts of here, Los Angeles. I would encourage staff to continue to work with outreach, because I think the reason we weren't successful, I was not successful, is because of the lack of outreach to try to convince people of the overall benefits in exchange for the personal inconveniences that someone is going to have. And that, as someone who drives from Buena Vista and turns on Chandler often in those lights, 20 years later, I'm still wondering if my turn has come up to turn left, or if the pedestrians have the right of way, or if the arrow is pointing to me or somebody else. So eventually, hopefully that will happen. So again, I was lobbying my fellow board members so that when this comes back to us, hopefully we will find it in our hearts to see if we can supply money, if indeed money is needed, to at least implement the advancement of the final link of the Chandler bike path that will take us to the transit center. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to comment, Board Member Portion. I agree with 100%. I use that particular, I use Chandler at least once a week with my dog, and walk the entire length. And that particular section that he was talking about does need to be improved. I mean, for 20 years, you think like, no one uses those tracks for delivery anymore. So, and yeah, it should go and turn into a park. Just in agreement. And the other thing I would like to bring up would be the golf course. I don't know if it gets watered regularly, but just recently out there playing golf and couldn't help notice how dry it's become, and almost hazardous because it's dry. And I would like to know that I would like to encourage the park people to at least water the place a couple times a week, because it's so dry up there. It's almost hazardous for players. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Marissa, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Coronado. If I may, absolutely, we are actually watering the golf course. I will say that a part of the issue with the golf course and the dry patches or areas is due to the irrigation system that we have there. So I am very, very excited and pleased to share with the board that we did go out to bid and have received bids this week for the replacement of the irrigation system at 10 holes of the golf course.
Okay.
So that will help that golf course tremendously, one with the aesthetics, but also just efficiencies. Making sure that we, if there are any issues with our irrigation system, the new irrigation system will also have an irrigation control system that will alert the staff of where there's issues. So we're not, our team is not looking for, we know that there's a leak somewhere and they're like looking for it, right? It'll definitely identify that. Watering will also be based on weather. So a lot of our irrigation is manually operated. So the fact that at least half of the golf course, right, will be adjusted based on the weather conditions. So if there's rain, the weather will definitely affect and will be easy to adjust that. So that is definitely something that we are super excited. I know that not a lot of people are excited about irrigation, but we are seeing that we have, we are, I believe, the second largest water consumers in the city is Parks and Recreation, and because of our parks and our golf course. Also, this irrigation system will, again, our consumption of water, it's all reclaimed, which is fantastic. but we're not going to be using as much water. We'll just be using it a lot more efficiently. So our plan is to award this contract in the next couple of months. It'll go to council for award. We will then begin construction, and it'll be done systematically so that we don't disrupt too much of that golf operation, and then be asking for funding to complete the rest of the golf course, including the par 3.
Thank you.
Great. Sounds good to have a smart watering system to help conserve, as we know there's quite a water shortage. All right. Do we have any further comment on this item? Mr. Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Takahashi on the questions she asked. They were very detailed, they're very thoughtful, and I appreciate that you've spent the extra effort to compare the two unfunded lists, something which, to be honest, I didn't do. Second, Mr. Bergman and Mr. Hahn, I'm pleased by what I've heard this evening again. And so it's, from what I've heard, between now and late June and next spring, February, March, whenever, it's my understanding all of the city departments who have projects on the unfunded list will have the opportunity to review it again and say, yes, this still has merit, or no, it's gone into some other funded project, or no, it's unrealistic. Is that the case?
Yes, that is the case.
Okay. And one final comment on the issue of the Chandler Bikeway. I was on the planning board way back when this was proposed to be developed, and staff's initial, staff being community development, not public works, initial response was to have the bike path on the street level on the south barrel of Chandler, and to move the curb back, I think it was like 8 feet, 3 miles across the city. I happened to be working in the area of Culver City at that time, and I saw what they did with their former railroad right-of-way, which turned it into a path, meandering, a bike path, but also multi-purpose path. And I said, we can do better than that. And although my name doesn't appear on any plaque along Chandler Bikeway, I was able to persuade both the planning board and the city council to have a different approach toward the bike path. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Jackson. And yes, Ms. Takahashi, thank you so much for all the questions tonight, for everyone for all the comments. All right, so now we're moving on to the introduction of additional agenda items, if nobody has anything else. And what I have is pending or additional agenda items. I guess we'll take comment if there's anything you'd like to see coming up, added to the agenda over and above what we have tonight. Go ahead, Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, I heard from you, Ken, that the issue of pavement management program, which was last updated in 2017, would be coming to the oversight board with an update, whether it's actually completely updated or at least the status of that update. Is that out there for maybe our Christmas meeting?
Yeah, I think, Member Jackson, we can get to that by the end of the year. Last time the update I provided was we should be just about done. So I would like us to have the completed report. And I know I've seen it and I put it at 90%. So I think we should be done and have no problem bringing that before you in the fall. We have our meetings pretty set through October, but absolutely, I think it's a great thing for the board to hear. And I know the engineering staff is excited to have the opportunity.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you.
Great question, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Takahashi, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say to staff, I don't know who came up with the idea of putting out the different months and what we plan on having in those months, but thank you very much. It gives a much more clear future planning, and it's reassuring that these topics will come up again. For August and October with the quarter reports, I would just want to make note, again, my request that in these reports that the unfunded list come back, even if it's not changed at all, even there has been no change, to just include it in the quarter report of the unfunded list so that we have it for reference, if that's okay. And then secondly, I just wanted to put it out there because of the discussion tonight that it sounds like there's a lot of interest in updates about the Chandler bike path. So I'm wondering if maybe at some point, not necessarily in these 4 meetings, but at some point we could have Mr. Kriski come back with if there's been any major updates, or if he wants to give us a review of what some of the plans are for that, so that we can have an opportunity to specifically ask questions about that. Because I think that Mr. Vandervoort mentioned that there's 4 or 5 different projects related to the bike path on the unfunded list. So, and even probably, currently and going on right now. So I think that would be, if the rest of the board would agree, if they think that would be interesting, that might be something worthwhile to bring back as an actual agenda item. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question of the board?
Go right.
I would recommend the unfunded needs list does not come forward with the quarterly reports, because the purpose of those reports is to discuss what has been done in the previous quarter of the capital program that this board and council approved moving forward with. And the unfunded needs list, unfunded project list is a voluminous item to chew on for quarterly reports. I would like to recommend that if there are changes during the quarter, we can highlight those in you've seen the presentation a couple of times. We can have a slide that says updates of the unfunded needs or project list, and make sure the board knows if there are any changes in the previous quarter, if that's okay.
That works for me, if it works for everybody else.
Okay, great.
It works for me. Do we have any further comment on that?
Thank you, Member Takahashi. Thank you, board.
Thank you, Mr. Berkman. All right, so any other additional agenda items, ideas out there? All right, so I'll go ahead and read for
Mr. Avazian, I believe, has one.
Oh, Mr. Avazian, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody. Thank you for that, Ms. Takahashi. Go ahead, Mr. Avazian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just out of my curiosity, Mr. Berkman, for the payment management program, what kind of data collection method do you use? Windshield survey, or it's laser scanning or orthophotographic?
So through the chair, I know Ms. Kurohara is looking at me. We can't have a discussion on this, but I can answer briefly that we hire a consultant, and it's an all-encompassing review, field surveys, data, and software. And we look forward to presenting that to you in the fall, before the end of the year. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kurohara, for being present to keep us on course here. We appreciate that. So moving on, I was going to read the upcoming meetings just so if the public, if they're watching, they can see what they can look forward to. For July, we have CIP bid and construction phase presentation. For August, we have fire protection of city facilities adjacent to hillside areas and fourth quarter report that you've heard so much about here tonight. September, the review of the IOB's scope of responsibilities, joint meeting with the Transportation Commission and the IOB to review responsibilities relating to traffic, which is good. We look forward to that. And for October, we have update on Measure P, Fund 534, sales tax income, and the first quarter report for year 21-22. And then the other meetings, anticipating we'll have the pavement update and a Chandler bike path update somewhere in there. Other than that, I don't have anything further.
Mayor Coronado?
Yes.
So the September meeting, the joint meeting, Mr. Burpian and I discussed it, and the meeting, we are going to combine it for the transportation meeting date on September 20th. So that's something we would have to formally change and notice everyone. And then also the title for the update for Measure P. I think the initial title from last meeting was Update on Sales Tax Income. So we actually changed it to Update on Measure P because there's an annual audit that's actually done for Measure P, and the Director of Finance said after the audit, it would be best time to actually do a presentation, and this would be an annual update that the Director of Finance will be giving to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Han. Mr. Vanderboort?
Madam Chair, Mr. Han, you just said that our September meeting will not be on our regularly scheduled date, but it will be earlier to accommodate the Transportation Commission.
Yes, so the date is the September 20th. It's the same week, but it's on a Monday, I believe.
Bummer. I'll be out of town. I was coming back on the 22nd, so that'd be here for our meeting. But okay, I'm going to miss it. But if it can't be done, that's what it is. Thank you. I'm sorry, just heads up, I won't be present for that meeting.
Through the chair, Board Member Vanderboort, I have a feeling that will not be a one and done meeting.
Thank you.
You'll have the opportunity.
All right. Thank you for that. Any further questions, comments? All right. Our next scheduled meeting is July 22nd at 6 p.m. I look forward to seeing all of you then. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Adios.
Good night.